If that dog starts howling at that shed one more time, I swear, I'm sleeping in the truck. That was the first thing I ever said about Murphy. Not proud of it, just being honest. Back then, I didn't know what kind of heart that old dog carried, or what he'd seen. All I knew was that he wasn't mine. He wasn't quiet, and he sure as heck wasn't going to let me forget the shed existed. I just moved to Maple Hill, a little town tucked between endless cornfields and winding country roads in central Illinois. I'd rented the old Rosco place, one of those weather-worn farmhouses with sagging porches, creaky floorboards, and peeling white paint that flaked like old skin. The kind of place you tell yourself has charm while brushing spiders off the kitchen cabinets and wondering if the roof will hold through winter. It was cheap, and that's all I could afford after leaving everything behind in Cincinnati. Divorce has a funny way of clearing out your bank account and your weekends. Murphy came with the place, sort of. He wasn't listed in the rental agreement, but Tracy, Ed Roscoe's niece, had said casually, "Oh, and there's a dog. Don't worry, he's old, mostly keeps to himself, doesn't bite." She was right about the biting, but she forgot to mention the howling. He wasn't exactly a pretty sight. Grey around the muzzle, patchy fur, like he'd lost a few too many fights with raccoons, and a limp in his back leg that made you wince when he walked. But there was something about him. Those tired copper-colored eyes that seemed to hold decades of silence, like he'd witnessed things no dog should ever have to remember. And then there was the shed. Tucked in the back corner of the overgrown yard, it was made of dark, rotting wood that looked nearly black with age. One side leaned hard to the left, like it was giving up on staying upright. A rusted padlock hung on the door, solid, unbroken, untouched. I didn't think much of it at first. Every farmhouse has a haunted shed, right? But Murphy wouldn't let it go. Every night, around dusk, he'd limp out to the edge of the yard and sit in front of the shed. Then he'd start. Low at first, just a whimper, like a whisper he was afraid to say out loud. Then the howling would come. Long, mournful cries that didn't sound angry or scared, just heartbroken. Like he was calling for something, or someone. The neighbors didn't seem to mind. "That dog's been doing that since Ed died," one of them said while picking tomatoes off a vine. "We all got used to it. Guess he's grieving." But it didn't feel like grief to me. It felt like a warning. By the end of the first week, I'd started putting in earplugs. By the end of the second, I was seriously considering asking Tracy if the dog could be relocated. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way Murphy looked at me after he howled, not with accusation, but with something deeper, like he wanted me to understand, like he was asking me for help. I finally decided to take a closer look. One Saturday morning, after another sleepless night of howling, I walked out to the shed with a crowbar and a mug of black coffee, steam curling into the cold air. Murphy watched from the porch, tail twitching, not wagging, just waiting. The padlock didn't come off easy. Took nearly 10 minutes of prying, grunting, and muttering curses under my breath before it finally gave way with a metallic snap that echoed across the silent yard. I hesitated before pulling the doors open, half expecting raccoons, snakes, or worse. But there was nothing, just a thick, musty smell and dust motes dancing in the sunlight that filtered through a hole in the roof. Inside were a few old tools, a broken lawn chair, and a stack of wooden crates covered in cobwebs. I stepped inside, floorboards groaning under my boots like they hadn't been walked on in years. Murphy padded up behind me and let out a low growl, not at me. At the back corner of the shed, I turned. There, half hidden beneath a layer of grime and rotted leaves, was a small hatch in the floor, like a root cellar door, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. I looked at Murphy. He whined. I opened it. A ladder descended into darkness, old but sturdy. I climbed down a few steps, then froze. The air was cooler down there, damp, still, heavy with the scent of earth and forgotten time. I flicked on the flashlight from my phone. A single wooden box sat in the center of the space. I stepped off the ladder and walked over. The box was about the size of a large cooler, unmarked, dusty, sealed with rusted nails. Murphy stood at the edge of the hatch, silent now, ears perked forward like antennas tuned to the past. I opened the box. Inside was a pile of yellowed papers, a faded dog collar, and a plastic bag containing what looked like a roll of old film. The collar had a name tag, Daisy. Murphy let out one long, low howl, the kind that raises the hairs on the back of your neck and makes your chest ache with something you can't name. I brought the contents up to the house and laid them out on the kitchen table. Most of the papers were handwritten notes, dated almost 20 years ago. Some were letters. A few were childlike drawings, a girl with curly hair holding a golden retriever, smiling under a tree, walking down a dirt road. The film roll had a date on it, August 2003. I didn't have a way to develop it, but I knew who might. There was a little photography shop on Main Street, run by a quiet man named Earl, who looked like he hadn't smiled since Nixon resigned. He still processed old film, out of habit or stubbornness. Sure, he said, taking the film carefully, his fingers steady despite the tremor in his hands. Come back Tuesday. Murphy and I walked back to the truck. For the first time since I'd moved in, he didn't limp. His steps were steady, almost eager. That night, he didn't howl. Tuesday couldn't come fast enough. Earl handed me the envelope without a word. Inside were 6 developed photos. I flicked through them, heart pounding. The first, a little girl with curly hair, maybe 7 or 8, holding a golden retriever puppy, beaming like the sun had just risen for her. The second, the girl older, maybe 10, standing in the yard in front of the shed. The dog beside her, tongue out, tail mid-wag. The third made my stomach drop. The girl was crying. The dog was gone. In the background, barely visible in the shadows, stood a man, face unclear, but posture tense, arms crossed. The fourth photo was completely dark, just black. The fifth showed the inside of the shed, the hatch clearly visible. The last one was just Murphy, looking straight into the camera, eyes full of grief and warning. I sat there, staring at that photo for a long time. I didn't sleep that night, not because of howling. Murphy was quiet, but because something was rattling in my chest, a sense that whatever had happened here wasn't finished. And Murphy had been waiting for 20 years for someone to listen. I started reading the letters. Most were written in a child's handwriting, uneven and earnest. One name kept appearing, Daisy. A few were addressed to her. Dear Daisy, I miss you every day. I still hear you barking. I hope you're happy now. Love, Lacy. There was a note from Ed Rosco, dated years later, scrawled in shaky handwriting. I never forgave myself. She begged me to let her keep the dog. Said Daisy was her best friend. I told her it was just a dog. After the accident, I buried the collar and the memories. But Murphy wouldn't stop crying. There was no accident report in the pile. No official record. Just guilt scribbled in the margins of a life. I called the vet the next day. I wanted Murphy looked over. He wasn't mine, but I felt responsible now. And if he was carrying around pain this deep, I wanted to know if it had left more than emotional scars. Dr. Helen Carter, local vet and longtime animal whisperer, gave Murphy a long, gentle exam. She cooed softly as she checked his joints, teeth, heart. "He's old," she said finally, "but strong. Been through a lot though, you can tell." I showed her the collar. Her eyes widened. Lacy Rosco, I remember that name. That was years ago. Poor little thing. Whole town felt it. But the story just disappeared. Family moved away. Ed never talked about it. Said the dog ran off. But we never saw her again. I told her about the shed. She stared at me a long moment. Then asked, "Do you still have the photos?" I handed them over. She flipped through them slowly. When she got to the last one, Murphy's portrait, she gasped. Then she picked up her phone. "I think you need to call the sheriff," she said, voice low. "And maybe the local news." Murphy wagged his tail for the first time since I'd met him. And I realized then, whatever secrets had been buried in that shed, they weren't just about a lost dog. They were about to change everything. The rain had stopped by the time we got back to the farmhouse. The air was clean, cool, quiet in a way it hadn't been in weeks. Murphy walked slowly beside me, his steps deliberate, his breathing steady. He didn't go to the porch. He went straight to the shed. He sat in front of it, just like he had every night for 20 years. But this time, there was no howl, no whimper, no plea, just silence. And in that silence, I understood. He wasn't calling for them anymore. He was honoring them. The next morning, I found him lying beneath the old oak tree, the one from Lacy's photo. His eyes were closed, his chest rising and falling in slow, deep breaths. I sat beside him, hand resting on his side, feeling the warmth of a life that had carried too much for too long. "You did it, old boy," I whispered. "You brought her home." He opened one eye, looked at me, and gave the faintest wag of his tail. That afternoon, the coroner's report came in. Positive ID, Lacy Rosco. Cause of death, malnutrition, exposure. Time of death, late spring 2003. She hadn't run away. She hadn't moved to Ohio. She'd been locked away, forgotten by the world, but never by Murphy. The town held a memorial service a week later. Dozens came. Neighbors, old classmates, even people who'd never met Lacy, but felt her loss like a stone in their chest. They brought flowers, candles, stuffed animals. Murphy sat in the front row, collar clean, fur brushed, eyes fixed on the small casket adorned with daisies. Afterward, Jessica handed me a small wooden box. "We found this buried beneath the tree," she said. It was wrapped in Lacy's favorite blanket. Inside was a tin whistle, worn smooth from years of use. On the back, scratched into the metal, "For my hero." I knelt and placed it around Murphy's neck. He didn't resist. He just leaned into my hand, like he finally felt safe. That night, for the first time in 20 years, the shed was silent. Not because the truth was buried, but because it had finally been spoken. And Murphy? He slept through the night. Deep, dreamless, at peace. He'd kept his promise. He'd guarded the truth until someone listened. And now he could rest. But before he did, He led us to one last secret. A week later, while walking the property line, Murphy stopped by a half-rotted stump near the woods. He pawed at the ground, then looked up at me with those quiet, knowing eyes. I dug. Beneath the roots, wrapped in oilcloth, was a small journal, Kara's. The final entry read, "If you're reading this, you found Murphy. Thank you for listening to him. He never forgot us. Please, make sure he's never forgotten either." I read it aloud to him under the oak tree. He closed his eyes and sighed. A long, slow breath, like a weight finally lifted. 2 days later, he passed quietly in his sleep, curled beneath the tree, with the whistle still around his neck and Lacy's toy ring tucked under his paw. We buried him beside her, not as a pet, but as a guardian, as a witness, as a hero. And on his headstone, we carved only 3 words. He never forgot. Because some dogs don't just love. They remember. They protect. They wait. And sometimes, they change the world by refusing to let the truth stay buried. If that dog starts howling at that shed one more time, maybe you should listen.